forward to hearing from you, and within the 10 minutes we'll try and ask you any questions, but what do you want us to know?
Kia ora tātou, thank you Mr Chairman. We've got a very clear and succinct 7-point submission which I'm not going to refer to in any detail. I just want to pick up a couple of priority areas, and bullet point 2 in my submission, which is about the plan's priority area number 1 about road safety. And State Highway 2 is an important part of the lifeblood of Hawke's Bay and indeed of Central Hawke's Bay as well, so much so that it directly runs through to our 2 biggest towns. And there's not enough weight given in this plan to the safety considerations of State Highway 2 going through those towns. The trucks, the speed, the width, the treatment of pedestrian crossings, the other initiatives to manage and calm the speed through those areas, and the safety that should be given due consideration. So much so that Central Hawke's Bay District Council a couple of months ago was in receipt of a petition from residents and road users in Waipawa about their concerns for pedestrian safety and safety from the trucks going through the town, and that petition also went to NZTA. I think that heightening the priority of this in the plan would certainly help make sure that NZTA hears our community and the petitions that have been tabled to them. The other priority area is about the exploration and the funding support for public transport in rural Hawke's Bay, which currently is non-existent and is currently funded through volunteers and community agencies. And that is the Choate Trust that runs a van in Waipawa. That is St John and Red Cross who run the health services and the volunteers that do that transport. And there is more that we need to do to support our communities in that. And finally, we are in the enviable position in Central Hawke's Bay of having a 12-year promise of a footpath to nowhere. And that is the footpath that connects along what I will call the pulmonary artery of Central Hawke's Bay between Waipokoro and Waipawa. And if we're serious about transforming communities into a more sustainable, carbon-focused future, having a footpath and cycle path completed between the 2 towns, as promised for the last 12 years, needs to be a priority, and the more we mention it in the plan, the better. There are commitments, but no action. Here endeth my submission.
Well, that was clear and to the point. So, am I right in understanding then that there is no specific line item for the footpath project in the RLTP as it stands, or is it? It is, but I'm just pointing out the more often that we can mention it, as part of the context of transforming the transport systems, the better. Okay. I understand that. Questions from members of the committee? Councillor Taylor, you can ask one if you wish.
And you said funding support for public transport, that we've got the ones that do it now from a community point of view. Does the council want public transport to Napier and Hastings, or are we talking around CHB, or both?
I think there are 2 parts. So one is the support of the existing community-based public transport, is what I would say, which is about how we move around in our community. But the second one is exploring, and a very good example is the submission that has come from EIT about the bus links going out to the Taradale campus. The numbers of students that go from Central Hawke's Bay to EIT's Taradale campus is quite significant, and actually if we're going to explore heightening EIT as a transport hub when it comes to the bus transport, certainly exploring what it looks like connecting to Central Hawke's Bay would be a worthy addition to the project.
Mayor Walker, have you got in mind, we're doing this on-demand pilot study for, we hope, transforming culturally and practically both the uptake and buy-in to and availability of useful public transport within Hastings and Napier. Can you see something like that working in Central Hawke's Bay, and if so, how? who might we partner with and using technology like apps and things like that. Have you got any thoughts about that?
Certainly, and I think that the trial of the on-demand public transport for the region is a very worthy initiative, and have very much in support of that. When it comes to the rural community, I think there's two ways to look at it. The first one would be, how do we partner with the current, I would say, health transport providers, because they're the ones that have current existing networks that would be an appropriate place to partner with. But I would also point out that actually our rural communities, in their own way, do on-demand public transport, and I will give you an example. And that is a community Facebook group called What's on Pōrongaho, which is our most isolated rural community in Central Hawke's Bay. And the number of times that members of that community will jump on there and say, who's going to Waipukaro today? Or who can pick up a parcel for me the next time they're in Hastings? And community connect themselves together to provide that resilience. So, if you will, our rural communities are already doing on-demand public transport.
So one of the ways we could then take that forward, actually assist, is actually through establishing platforms, IT platforms that could make that sort of system operate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure, right here. Okay. Have you got any thoughts on the utility or otherwise of a rail commuter service from Waipukaro to Hastings and Napier?
I think the aspirations for public transport by rail between the two, between Central Hawke's Bay and the Hastings Napier area, I think the aspirations are well founded. I think the practicalities of it right now are challenged, and I say that because if we look at it from a commuter perspective, getting to Hastings or Napier on the railway system is one thing, but then getting to your place of work is another, and I think that challenges it. And I think also I lived in the Wairarapa quite a number of years ago now, and the funding challenges even for a very big direct commuter population there was challenging. So I think the aspirations are good. I'm not sure that the timing and the practicality are quite there yet.
The viability may not.
Absolutely.
May not be,
yeah.
So you're back to buses and
yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
All right. Look, that's very clear and helpful. And I think equally the point you tabled about the safety of State Highway 2 going through Waipawa, for example, is I'll put a big highlighter pen over that. So.
If you will, the idea of digital platforms and like rideshare platform potentially between Central Hawke's Bay and the wider region, I think also would have some benefits as well. There's a lot of commuting people in individual vehicles, that a rideshare platform could certainly help in that too.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Mayor Walker.
Thank you very much.
I think we can now hear from the next submitter, is appearing by Zoom, Mr. Paul Bailey. Welcome, Paul. Are you with us? Can you hear us?
He's on mute.
Yep, unmuted.
Great. Well, look, Mr. Bailey, you'd know how this works. We're wanting to ensure that you've got the opportunity to make sure we take home the critical messages and understand the critical messages from your written submission. We won't be entering into discussion and debate at this time, but we will hopefully have some time for questions from committee members. So thank you for taking the time to make a submission. Good afternoon, welcome to you, and away you go.
Yep, kia ora Martin. Kia ora, hello Craig, how are you? Look, I'd just like to fully support, I listened to what Craig, one of the questions Craig asked the submitter before afternoon tea about licensing in Wairoa, and I'm fully supportive of any initiative that's taken to give the tamariki in that area the opportunity to get licences in their local area. I'm also fully supportive of what Mayor Walker said was speaking about in her submission with respect to some sort of transport system in Central Hawke's Bay, and connecting our rural communities into our major centres, I think, is a really important thing. Look, the guts of my submission, written submission, is around the lack of detail on any sort of initiative to deal with climate change issues in Hawke's Bay through increased or improved transport initiatives. There is no detail on the plan, and it's I find that simply appalling and makes the whole thing pretty much a waste of time. So that's the guts of my submission. That's all I really want to say, is that at the end of the day, you guys need to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch again. You can do way, way better to let the public know how the region is going to deal with the climate change crisis that is facing us. Thank you.
Questions? Is that, we've got a bit of background noise there, is it?
I'm sitting in the Featherston Public Library.
Oh, okay, so that's good. That's difficult. We won't hold you responsible for the background noise then.
No. The kids are having a great time.
All right, did you hear Mr. Van, or Councillor Van Bake's submission earlier, Mr. Bailey?
No. I only stepped into the one just before Smoko.
Yeah, well, we've certainly had it impressed upon us the need to actually have some more clarity on the tangible steps towards mitigating climate change impact through transport. So that's a message we've received very, very clearly.
Yeah. Can I just say, Martin, the initiative to do the on-demand transport services in Hastings and Napier, I think, is a worthwhile initiative. But there's nothing in the plan about it to sketch it out as to what it is. Right. And there's been an awful lot of comment on social media taking the mickey out of the regional council for the idea. And there's no detail that you can go back to the public and say, this is how it's going to work. So I reckon that's an opportunity that you may have lost.
Right. Oh, yes, I went into debate about that, but it's something I'm acutely aware of, that we need to ensure that our public understands exactly what is involved with that. It's at conceptual stage at the moment, and we are on that space like a rash. So stand by for incoming. If there's no other questions from members of the committee, your message was very, very clear and pertinent. So thank you, Mr. Bailey.
No worries. Cheers.
Right, good afternoon. All right, so we were to have heard now from Federated Farmers, who, as I've just mentioned, have tabled a submission. And can I just say that it was a very thorough and detailed written submission, which I thought was was a real credit to Federated Farmers in raising the perspectives of the rural communities and the unique issues facing the people that live in what is geographically by far the majority of this region. So I do encourage us all to pay close attention to what was said there.
Just one thing on that, Martin, they talk about the cost of roading, and then they say that we're not depreciating enough or whatever. If we depreciated what they probably wanted, they'd be paying a lot more for their roading.
Right.
So it's a two-edged sword.
Understand. Yes, all right. We now, I think, are in a position where we could hear from Ms. Tiley, submitter number 38, who's on page 140. Welcome to you. Lovely to have you with us. And were you here? You've just arrived, haven't you?
Just arrived,
Okay,
yeah.
so we've got 10 minutes per submitter. It's really an opportunity to make sure that the key messages you wish to impart and for us to take into our deliberations in May are not lost on us. We have read your written submission. We will hopefully be able to ask you some questions within the time available, but thank you for taking the time and making the effort to make a submission. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou. I'm probably going to flesh out a bit of, reiterate some of what Paul Bailey said a bit earlier. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm here as a concerned Hawke's Bay resident, but I also wear a green hat as co-convener of the Hawke's Bay branch of the Green Party, and I'm a parent and a grandparent. My family settled in Hawke's Bay in the mid-1800s, and my two grandchildren, Moss and Audrey, are seventh generation locals. So what happens in Hawke's Bay and what happens going forward is really important to us. We're here for the long haul. I urge decision makers on the RTC as our representatives to take leadership in ensuring all decisions are informed by the HBRC's commitment to its climate change emergency declaration. We're already experiencing drought and flooding at great cost and anticipating having to mitigate sea level rise. These are not sort of fantasy things that are going to happen in the future. They've started. You stated on the Hawke's Bay Regional Council website that we know that the actions we take over the next 10 years will be critical to ensure our climate resilience as a region. So what does leadership look like? Leadership means making the hard and controversial decisions in difficult and uncertain times, to rise above the usual day-to-day response and to inspire new behaviour to support effective change. I want to take this opportunity to give a few snapshots of local and national actions and ideas which our council could look at, and I know some of them have been mentioned already, but I don't think it hurts to reiterate. In this urban setting, climate change mitigation needs a two-pronged approach, both transport and urban design. Business and politics commentator Rod Oram in Newsroom on the 21st of February talks about the concept of the 20-minute city. He says, we're urban laggards for many reasons, such as we build cheaply for the short term, we squander land, we don't plan strategically for the long term, and we have yet to create a distinctive Aotearoa style of urbanism, enlivened by the natural beauty and cultural riches of our nation. The principle of the 20-minute city is simple. However large a city is, each neighbourhood offers almost everything its residents need for their day-to-day life and work within 20 minutes travel by walking, cycling and public transport. No cars required. To state the obvious, reducing emissions is a combination of low carbon fuel and fewer single-trip, single-passage vehicles. This draft plan fails to give any detail about how Hawke's Bay will meet its commitment to the Climate Change Emergency Declaration. It identifies that we are a car-dependent region, that this dependency is increasing, and that road transport is, to quote, recording an increase in greenhouse gas emissions, but there is nothing in the plan that drills down into any detail about how we will turn that trend around. Auckland Council has adopted a climate plan following on from their climate emergency declaration. It has set goals for a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030, which will require a 64% reduction in transport emissions and net zero emissions by 2050. The Hawke's Bay economy reflects a key national problem regularly discussed by economist and journalist Bernard Hickey, that of attachment to cars and particularly to twin cab utes. This is particularly relevant to Hawke's Bay with two rapidly developing cities and extensive agriculture, horticulture and viticulture, meaning many commercial utes on the road. Until there is a significant uptake in electric-powered utes, they continue to be major emitters. To counter this, we need a mix of changes in the built environment, more public transport to reduce traffic on the road, and a culture change to encourage private ute owners to switch to more environmentally appropriate vehicles. To quote Bernard Hickey, to halve carbon emissions from cars and utes requires massive changes in the way we live our lives, run our society and power our economy. Firstly, it would require a lot of trips in cities of less than 10 kilometres that are currently done in cars, SUVs and utes to happen on buses and trains or through walking and cycling. That means a lot more people living in denser housing closer to city centres, subsidised bus and train networks, and a lot more people choosing not to have their own cars. Given our current population growth rate of around 1.5% per year, it would also require a lot more vehicles to be smaller, lighter and electric powered. He goes on, let's look at what we currently buy and drive. Only 2 of the 20 most sold new vehicles in 2020 were in that category of smaller, lighter and electric powered. The other 18 were double cab utes and SUVs. They are advertised as more than vehicles. They are expressions of identity, of family, of manliness, of sportiness, the outdoors and wide open spaces. It's no accident that Barry Crump, the quintessential Kiwi bloke, became the face of Toyota Hilux. Food for thought. Leadership is about actions and attitude change. Locally, the DHB is leading by example. I talked to Jessica Smith, DHB Sustainability Officer, to find out about the Go Well project started in October 2016. It encompasses a bus subsidy, active transport initiatives and facilities, including pool bikes for staff use and secure bike lock-up facilities, an incentivised carpooling scheme, a security escort system to get staff off the premises in the dark where their cars are parked off-site, a guaranteed ride home system, and paid parking on the hospital site, which helps to subsidise the cost of some of these initiatives. This project addresses DHB issues, but it has also wider general benefits, promoting exercise, reducing dependency on private car travel, and reducing the environmental impact and carbon footprint of travel. Are similar initiatives being encouraged at other large employers around the Bay, at EIT, pack houses, Heinz Watties, Panpack, etc.? I see this as once the general population start using these schemes and seeing them as normal, it helps to see public transport and other forms of transport, helps with the attitude change that make those a normal part of everyday life. Finally, and this has been brought up today, which I'm really delighted to see and hear, can we consider resurrecting the region's passenger rail network? While our population centres are much smaller, we do have a rail link between Hastings and Napier and Central Hawke's Bay, and this week we saw the start of a rail link between Hamilton and Auckland. On the Hamilton to Auckland rail service, Kiwi Rail Chief Executive Greg Miller said, "It's taken courage, commitment and a large investment by councils and central government and Kiwi Rail. Nothing less is needed to make these bold changes." I want to thank you by listening, finish by thank you for listening to my submission, but I also want you to note, though, that any private citizen who is submitting is doing this on their own time, and it takes a lot of time to research, write, submit and present. We all do it because what happens matters to us and we believe it's worth it, and we believe that you're listening. We are not the experts. We vote councillors in and we expect you to get the best advice to create the best environment. I urge that everything be done now to reverse private motor vehicle usage and the consequences of this on our environment. We need your committee to lead on climate action for Hawke's Bay now. Ngā mihi nui.
And thank you for your passion and your time and effort, as I had shared with some previous submitters. It's absolutely essential to not only keep us on task, but I guess to embolden us to achieve the vision that you
I hope
shared. So, do any of my committee members have questions? Now, your point about attitude change. So you're really talking about champions
Yep.
within business and the council itself, and saying here's a new way of doing things. Is that the point?
Yeah, I think once something becomes normalised, takes leadership, and people get forced into change. I mean, the one that's quoted all the time is plastic bags in supermarkets. We did that so painlessly. You know, smoking in public places, we don't even think about it. Whereas, you know, what worries me is that people, you know, Joe Average thinks that sort of climate change is kind of like your homework, that if you cram the night before, you can kind of somehow get away with it, and that's not the case. And so if bigger organisations show the willpower and commit to it, so that if these large employers start introducing schemes that normalise behaviours to people, so people get used to taking buses. You know, if a train turns up in Hastings and the DHB send, minibuses to meet the train to get their staff up there, that becomes normal for them to catch the bus. And so then their kids, everybody starts thinking, how can I get there by bus, rather than the attitude at the moment is there won't be a bus that leaves on time, arrives in any, reasonable time. I'll be sitting on a bus for an hour and a half and I have to go past EIT to get anywhere near Hastings. And I won't be able to get home at the end of the day. I mean, we know all this, and I am aware of the on-demand service, and I, really look forward to seeing how effective that is. But I do think that we've, in the cities, it's normal to take the bus. Here it's seen as vaguely nerdy to take the bus.
I couldn't agree with you more, and so it's not so much a question as a reflection back to say that we totally understand that the way we invest in, Mr Van Bake's point, paint doesn't make it safe. We need to have roads for cycles.
Yeah.
And we need to make it something that's attractive, safe, and same with public transport. So
Affordable,
thank you for sharing that with us. We're alive to it.
Can you leave a copy of... Can I send it to you? It's got a lot of notes there.
Thank you again for your time.
I'll email you.
All right.
Thank you.
Now, the next submitter that I have on my schedule is Paula Fern. Submitter number 48, page 196.
Kia ora koutou.
Welcome, Paula. Thank you for joining us. You heard what I said to Arnie just before about how this works, so you've got 10 minutes and we'll try and put some questions into that. The floor is yours. Your time starts now.
Thank you. My name is Paula Fern. I'm a resident of Waipawa and I've lived there for 10 years now. The last 12 months have been a time of great unrest for many of us and a wake-up call. Personally, I had 3 significant milestones that I reached. 30 years of partnership with my husband Wade, my 50th birthday, and then a week later, the arrival of our first grandchild, a beautiful little boy called Tarangi. And he's really filled our family with love, hope, and renewed purpose. So it's on his behalf that I speak today. While the last 12 months have brought grief and disruption for many, it has also presented the opportunity for real systemic change. It's exposed our weaknesses like never before, which brings me to the Transport long-term plan. It's really hard to have hope when you know how bleak our situation actually is and the urgent action required. That is what I hope to see in the Transport long-term plan. Urgency and vision, and found neither. Now, just reflect, I listened to Robin Gwynn before and I thought, gosh, we all are saying very similar things as a reaction to it. I work in Hastings. I spend over an hour almost every day commuting by car. Ask anyone that makes the trip, will give you the stories of near misses, trucks travelling way too fast, and cutting corners. And that includes cars as well. We know the accident spots, sometimes the people whose deaths are marked by the crosses and heavy brake marks on the road. The reality too is that our children, when they do begin driving, have to be able to handle the open road from the get-go. I have a lot of time to think on my daily commute. The roads have become a lot busier in the 10 years we have lived in Waipawa, and the population in CHB is growing and shows no sign of slowing down. What I also see on my commute is the underutilised railway line that shadows State Highway 2 for most of my journey. When we first moved to Waipawa, we were invited to a birthday party, and the then Deputy Mayor was there. And I said to him, imagine if we had a passenger rail that connected all of Hawke's Bay. He said it'll never happen, and sort of scoffed. So I'm saying to you, why not? Reading other submissions, I saw others also mention passenger rail. I talked to friends and other locals, and they all say the same. Wouldn't that be a game changer? Instead, in your long-term plan, you talk about roads and swapping internal combustion engines for EVs. There is no public transport for CHB at all, as Alex and others have mentioned. Your push for EVs will further penalise those who can't afford the swap and have no other option, as you aren't focusing on any alternative. So I looked for a feasibility study for an explanation as to why mass transit isn't being implemented by you. All I could find was a study from 2012 that was done for Hastings District Council. Light rail was included in that, but at the beginning it was noted that the central government of the day gave a clear direction that economic development was key to all future transport infrastructure. So the study placed greater weight on that aspect. It seems as though your plan is following on from that direction and forgetting about the connecting parts, the social and environmental benefits. That's the win-win. Do any of you know what transition engineering is? Anybody? Have you ever come across it? Have you ever heard of Dr. Susan Crumdyke? She was a professor at Canterbury University for 20 odd years, and it's her specialty. Now is the time for transition engineering to come to the fore. It's about asking the right question, because you'll never have the right answer unless you first ask the right question. I contacted Susan, and she has sent me a couple of links that I would like to share with you after. There is an online course that your transport team can take where they can discover the process of sense-making based on sound science and technology information. We'll create local solutions and innovations that grow the local economy. There's also an executive course that HB leaders can take together for a day of what Susan terms visioneering. So to conclude, what am I asking of you? I'm asking that you all upskill yourself and learn about transition engineering. We need better thinking and vision that connects the communities of all Hawke's Bay. We need a multi-pronged approach that leaves no one behind. We have the rail infrastructure. Use it, build the best public transport network that you can. Make it an example that other regions aspire to. I would like to know that Tarangi, as an adult, has choices, and the framework you put in place now will allow that. If you continue on business as usual, he and others won't have any choices. So thank you for listening.
Kia ora. Well, kia ora. Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I just did a quick Google on transitional engineering. Looks very interesting.
It is very interesting.
We'll do some reading and research. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Can I have a copy?
Can I email it to you? Okay.
So, just to understand you, one of the, in practical terms, one of the key ways that we could transition, in your view, is through better utilisation of our existing rail.
Yes, yes.
How do you see, or what place do you see for minibuses, buses, things like on demand as a way of...
I think we need to get as many vehicles off the road network as possible.
Yeah.
That we actually, if you want to transition to EVs, that's the whole focus.
Yeah.
But you can't swap like for like. It's proven that you can't do that. You can't feasibly do that. So the only way forward is to get as many vehicles off the roading network and vastly improve our public transport.
Yes.
So we have to have a huge paradigm shift in our thinking, and we don't have time to muck around. You know, there's not another 10 years before you do something. You actually need to plan now. So you have to plan well and have to change the way we think about it. And that does come from the plan that you set in place.
One of the interesting things, Ms. Byrne, is that in fact there is a disconnect, because in fact I think you are preaching to the converted, but this plan has clearly been read by the community as something that's just continuation of the status quo, whereas in our minds this is not about building more roads for car use. This is about using our existing resources innovatively to transition to active and public transport. That was our intent, and it obviously just hasn't been delivered in terms of the way it's expressed.
Well, no, it's not. And as Alex said, there was no mention in there of public transport for Central Hawke's Bay. There's no linkage. And, you know, we're out on a limb, but we're part of Hawke's Bay.
Okay.
As I say, I travel into Hastings every day to work. I see where the buses are, those big buses that aren't full. I grew up in Palmerston North. They implemented minibuses back in the 90s that were always full. And they ran frequently.
That worked?
And they were affordable. And they went to the places that people wanted to go to. So you have to make it easier. Have to make it affordable. You have to make it reliable. You have to make it more frequent.
Yeah. Affordable, reliable and frequent. Yeah.
Yes.
Quite agree. Thank you.
But as I say, we need to get vehicles off the roads.
Were you aware that we had some key targets, and we've only got about 4 metric targets that involved quite significant reductions in travel by private vehicle to work and to education?
Now, as I said, what I read in your plan was the key focus of moving people out of petrol-powered vehicles into electric vehicles.
Okay, that's what you read. Okay.
That's what I read. And that appears to be what everyone else read too from the submissions.
All right, well, we've obviously got some work to do.
Is there any other questions at all?
No,
Good, thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, do we have Mr. White? He's been waiting patiently.
I've been listening.
Some time. Well, we look forward to listening to you.
Thank you.
And again, thank you for taking the time to share your views with us and to put your submission together. So, committee members, we are dealing with submission number 50 on page 200.
Right, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the Bike Hawke's Bay submission today. As a group, we seek to be a voice for people who ride bicycles in Hawke's Bay, and our vision is for cycling to be safe, comfortable and a convenient mode of transport for people of all ages and abilities. Here in Hawke's Bay, we're fortunate to have the regional pathway system, which provides a huge opportunity for recreation. And I think the Regional Council, together with the TLAs, are to be commended for the foresight and their ongoing collaboration in providing a relatively well-connected recreational system, which does in part contribute in a small way to active transport aspirations as sought in the opening chapters of the draft plan. When I came to Napier in 2015, I was also impressed with your plan of the time in terms of giving me a bit of an idea as a cyclist just where the bay was going, and I was quite positive, having come from the Lower Hutt. So there is some good stuff that's been done. However, in terms of the draft plan, the issues raised in the strategic context provide useful information, but quite scary and sobering in some respects when you look at the health stats. Section 3 describes our current transport system, and again, that's, I think, well presented. The policy context was also useful in understanding the complexity of the transport planning environment. The lack of accurate user data for active transport was, however, disappointing. I think there's quite a heavy reliance on NZ stats. I'd much prefer to see more specific active transport monitoring in the future. It doesn't provide a clear picture, though, of what our regional transport system aims to be, and it's inadequate to deliver the transformational shift necessary to address the issues raised in Section 2 and 3. We have in our submission suggested an alternative vision, and that emphasises the right mobility choice for the right place and function at the right time. And that's para 3 on page 4 of our submission. A far stronger stance on prioritisation of active modes and public transport is needed to be adopted to achieve the transformation required. We have also made a number of suggestions related to the improvement in the clarity of objectives and policies, as like the vision, currently they're too loose or weak to deliver the changes that are required. The community need to understand the gravity of the issues facing councils and the government and accept that prioritising active modes of transport and public transport is both necessary and essential. Business as usual is not going to deliver on the climate, social and health issues that are besetting our communities. While we agree with the objective to provide transport choices, we do not feel the language around transport choice adequately acknowledges or reflects how decades of prioritised investment in vehicle infrastructure has resulted in a transport system that makes driving by private vehicle the easiest and most convenient choice for most trips. Creating a truly equitable transport choice will mean making some modes like driving less efficient and convenient, but safe, connected and convenient active transport alternatives need to be available at that time. Currently, 1/3 of all household trips are under 2k, and almost half of them are under 6 kilometres. With the Hawke's Bay climate and the topography and the availability of electric bikes and scooters, there is no reason why a more progressive approach to choice could not be adopted. The plan mentions electric cars. People have mentioned they're expensive, but there's a huge shift to scooters and bikes, and when you've got the issues that you're talking about with EIT and Hastings, with direct, purpose-built, safe, separated cycleways, there's no reason why that can't be done with our climate in the future. We noted in our submission that parking, which is an important component of a transport system and a key tool in achieving the type of system needed, is not actually mentioned. That can be used to change behaviour, and it's something that we raise as a point perhaps for consideration. In relation to the policies, I'd like Council to note that currently there is no engagement of active transport user advocate groups and stakeholders in the current planning processes. In the future, their inclusion along with Council's NZTA and New Zealand Police would be beneficial. There also seems to be a significant disconnect between the objectives and targets and the investments proposed. Notwithstanding the aspiration of a 20% shift to active modes and public transport, which is quite ambitious, only 10% of the overall budget is dedicated to them. The sharing of the prioritisation methods adopted for the significant activities listed in the plan would assist readers in understanding the rationale of the project prioritisation and allow a shared clarity to be gained. Without this understanding, discussion is difficult on the merits of the projects listed. I'd also mention that there appear to be no active transport projects in the list of committed projects for the 2021-31 period, and only 3 of the 12 prioritised activities include walking and cycling. That is hardly transformational. So in closing, we live in a region with a mild climate, a flat topography. We have the benefit from the reset of the 1931 earthquake in terms of our infrastructure. Through this plan, the Council could be a leader and clearly state the strategic direction for transportation in Hawke's Bay over the next critical 10 years. This must protect the economic well-being of our community, but also must provide clear direction to the significant mode changes required. And to achieve that, significant redrafting will be required. And that is my submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. White. We are grateful you've taken a lot of time to put together a comprehensive submission with, as you say, specific suggestions for text.
Yeah.
And I think that really does help us. Quite often we're presented with issues, but we've got to go and figure out all the answers.
The detail or the options, yeah.
Yeah, so that really is appreciated. And just to let you know that it's on our committee now, we have direct representation from the Regional Cycling Governance Group. Marianne, so that's now been, that's your stakeholder point. Now, committee members, questions. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you very much. I'm really conscious that new bikes these days can cost several $1,000s and e-bikes more so. How important is it for CBDs, for businesses, for industry to have safe and secure storage for these very valuable items that you probably don't want to just plonk outside?
Yeah, well, my bike's outside and it's got a fairly big lock on it, but yeah, it's always a worry. I think that's something that, in terms of TLAs, we should be looking at in terms of our planning and building requirements, that if buildings are going in, there is perhaps incentive to have showers and good lockable storage. In Wellington, there is a stolen bikes Facebook page, and they're losing electric bikes out of buildings, out of lockable facilities. It's a business. But yeah, security of bikes and your investment is a key thing in terms of creating the right environment for that mode change. And that means not just putting in a bike stand, it means having security monitoring, etc. So users can actually have some confidence it's secure.
Thank you. And I'd like to just reiterate a really comprehensive report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. White? Right, I think you're free to go.
Thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you for yours. Is Mr. Simon available by Zoom, I think? Do we have Mr. Simon with us? Lance Simon? Doesn't appear so. In that case, the next submitter would be Mr. Sutherland. Do we have Mr. Sutherland?
It's 10 minutes. It was during 10 minutes' time.
Oh, he may be all right. So we've now got a situation where we're ahead of ourselves. It's rather remarkable.
Jenny Sutherland is talking.
She's spoken.
She spoke for
Oh,
Mrs. Gwynn.
Ms. Elliott, you wish to speak for your... I do apologise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Do her own one.
You're no longer Mrs. Gwynn.
Quickly divorce.
They were big shoes to fill.
They certainly were.
So, all right, well, that's a great idea. We can hear from you now. That will... thank you for being flexible and filling the slot. So, committee members, we are submitted 24, page 50. Oh, you can reintroduce yourself if you wish, Ms. Elliott, but we are now hearing from you in your own right, and the floor is all yours.
Kia ora koutou. If the devil is in the detail, then this is an angelic report. Because when it comes to how we in Hawke's Bay will meet our responsibilities to mitigate climate change, there is very little detail. Now, it could be that this is clever politics because the report does include broad brush statements about the climate crisis. Is the thinking that we don't want to alarm people with detailed policies and strategies until they have bought into the broad vision? It seems unlikely. So we need to put a bit of devil into this plan. My submission focuses on the urgency of climate change and the impact of our modes of transport on that. Because every decision made by political and community leaders now has to be investigated through the climate crisis lens. What will the impacts be of our decisions on emissions? Can we do more? And most importantly, what are the fundamental changes that need to happen and what are our steps to getting there. Failure to act on climate change now would be a massive betrayal of responsibility. This plan is intended to set the long-term vision and strategic direction with its regional priorities fed into the National Transport Plan. Now, I know you know this. I'm only repeating it because it highlights the enormous significance of this plan, a long-term vision with strategic direction that feeds into national policy. Quite honestly, when it comes to addressing greenhouse gas emissions, this plan falls way short of that. In 3.2 of the plan, the connections between transport and greenhouse gas emissions are made. The risks of the climate crisis to our region's transport networks and primary production sectors are outlined, and we are told our use of private cars is increasing while our use of public transport is declining. Meanwhile, road transport carries 95% of the region's freight, and the amounts are forecast to grow enormously. Something is terribly wrong here. The Regional Council has identified the importance of taking action. Its website says, we know that the actions we take over the next 10 years will be critical to ensure our climate resilience as a region. So we know the links, and we recognise how vulnerable our region is. So let's have a look at some of the detail of the plan through the climate crisis lens. In point 5.1, the plan puts road safety, better health and improved freight alongside reduce emissions as key objectives. I would argue that we need to make reduce emissions our number one objective, knowing that if we make fundamental changes to our transport networks to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we will also address those other objectives: safer roads, healthier people, and the resilience of our freight networks. The reduction of greenhouse gas emissions needs to be our first level objective, with everything else coming in underneath that as a second tier objective. In fact, if we don't get the first part of that right, and we don't reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, nothing else can really be effective. Our objectives will give us a measure of our success. The only objective relating to climate change in this plan is to have an increase of 20% of the population switching to an alternative to the private car for work, and 25% for education by 2030. So just under 9 years, and that is quite, that sounds, that sounds like an important measure. But why 20% and 25%? How were these figures arrived at? What are the actual emissions reductions forecast here? And how will these be impacted by our growing population? And our ageing population, which is presumably less likely to be driving to work or education anyway. There is no background or context in here, and consequently none of us can gauge how ambitious or realistic this objective is. These figures relate to numbers of people, but what about emissions targets? And what other strategies can we use to support this objective and possibly go further? Are the links being made and acted on in Hawke's Bay between good planning and transport emissions? I know Annie Tiley mentioned Hamilton's 20-minute city project and the evaluations of this being developed with the University of Waikato. These can inform similar approaches throughout the country. Let's ride in their slipstream, as it were, and adapt some of what they are developing to down here. What are the infrastructure projects for Hawke's Bay that will put our towns and cities on a pathway to zero emissions transport while making it easier to get around, reduce traffic numbers, and create safer, people-friendly streets. We need to reimagine our cities built for people rather than vehicles. Wellington is making some big moves in this direction now. Even small infrastructure projects here, such as more charging stations for e-vehicles, are important. At the moment, there are regularly queues, and that's off-putting for people considering the significant investment of an e-vehicle. And what about rail transport for people and for freight? We've had some excellent information about rail this afternoon on how much we could save on road building and maintenance and making transport safer if our country invested back into its rail networks. In point 3.9, the report says the rail system has potential to contribute to reducing greenhouse gases and improving resilience and safety on the interregional routes. Where are our statements about commitments to working with government to improve the rail networks? Increasing the share of freight on rail is mentioned within sustainable travel choices, but there is no further explanation. We need to consider the opportunities of interregional passenger transport too. Why not take the train to Wellington? Further down in the plan, Section 7 outlines the 10-year transport priorities with sustainable travel choices, i.e. addressing climate change, having slipped to number 4 here, behind road safety, freight and travel choices. And by the way, there is a very telling separation between travel choices and sustainable travel choices. So it's probably not surprising that in section 9.2, which has the list of prioritised programs for the next 10 years, there are only 3 sections out of 12 that even mention cycling and walking, and there's no mention of public transport. Everything else relates to roads. We can't keep doing this. Fundamental change is needed, and this is our opportunity. In conclusion, this plan outlines the risks of climate change to our region and how transport continues to contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. But it doesn't have a meaningful vision for turning that around or draw on evidence and ideas from elsewhere to show what is possible. We need to look for new ways of doing things and design policies to deliver on that. There's always a risk we're talking within our own bubbles, but sometimes people don't know what they want until they hear ideas articulated. We need strong political and community leaders to do this, and who can say, we're going to align budget, policies and structure to deliver on this. And to return to my analogy from the beginning, we need some clarity and detail in this plan, and we need the courage to dance with the devil. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Elliott. If the committee members got questions. I just want to pass on an observation. A light bulb went on for me, and I'm incredibly grateful to you, because we've had the Wirral placed before us that we're lacking in vision and we're lacking in urgency, and the challenge that presented to me was, well, how do we transform this plan in a way that would deliver that? And you've really given us some quite concrete ideas about the way, just even the order in which we express the priorities, and the fact that if we're not safe in climate change terms, we're not safe at all anyway. So I really appreciate that. I think that was incredibly helpful.
Can we get a copy?
Yeah. All right, well, last but not least, I think, in terms of submitters who are here today that said they wish to be heard, is the Eastern Transport Initiatives Group. We've got Alistair Halliburton and Kate Niman named.
I'm not here yet.
No, not here.
I asked them to be half an hour early,
Well, let's, maybe they got stuck in traffic.
Too many bikes on the road.
The devil's elbow or something horrendous.
I can
I guess not.
empathise a little bit, but they've changed the whole direction.
No, we'll wait. We'll stand down.
Okay.
We'll stand. Is everyone happy to do that?
Yep.
This is, yeah.
Quite happy to take 5.
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break and stand down.
Cool.